This is Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm the author of Analytical Psychology and Family Systems, Neo-Jungian Practice to Help Families Find Flow. And I'm the professor in this course, and I'm glad to have you all here. Okay, I'm going to give you a little lecture on participation mystique and the relationship of that to projective identification, which projective identification is really the way family systems gets involved with psychodynamic work, especially Jungian psychology. Okay, so let's see here. You can all see this, I hope. Tell me if you can't. Projective identification in the intersubjective field. And this is a picture of Melanie Klein, which Melanie Klein is like one of the founders of object relations, but which is an early psychodynamic twist on Freud's classic work. So in 1946, so you can think after World War II, Melanie Klein introduced the term projective identification in the following way. Much of the hatred against parts of the self is now directed towards the mother. This leads to a particular form of identification, which establishes the prototype of an aggressive object relation. I suggest that these processes, the term projective identification. Since then, projective identification has been redefined by various authors and has given rise to a vast literature. So there's a lot on it. And it's part of the in projective identification, you become part of the intersubjective field. In projective identification, parts of the self and internal objects are split off and projected into the external objects, which becomes possessed or controlled and identified with the projected parts. So I'm going to tell you a story, a true story of a client that a family that I worked with more than 25 years ago. So he'll never be able to figure out who it is or anything. But it was, I love ministers. I've worked a lot with clergy, but this is a story of a father who was a fundamentalist Christian minister. And he had a daughter that was going to a high school, and this must have been like in the early 80s. So I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. She would wear, what every other kid wore at the time, short skirt, and like it was a time, just so you all, some of you might not even know, but like where they had smoking sections in high schools and things like that. And she was like a young existentialist kid, but her father was a very fundamentalist minister. And so he would say when she was going out, I know you're going to, but he wouldn't, I'm not, when I say, I mean, he didn't say these words, but in projective identification, he would look at her in this way and say, I don't like what you're wearing, I can't, and have these arguments with her. And unconsciously, what he was projecting onto is, you're going to get pregnant. And so he comes to me and says, I know my daughter's going to get pregnant, she's doing this stuff. And I didn't understand it, but Jung later on is going to talk about the subtle body. But when he was talking to his daughter, I could almost see this dark, don't tell people that I hallucinate things, but I saw this dark shadow coming from him and engulfing her, and that was the projection. So projection is projective identification is one of the few defenses that has two people involved. Now, it's not one. It's not like I'm just projecting on somebody like, oh, that's a negative person, or like a cultural project, and I'm just projecting myself onto them. But projective identification, that is when the projection is then identified with by the person. When you have this intersubjective field, like in a family, the family unconscious, when you have that, the projection of the projection of like the father onto, and if you watch Freud's Last Session, you'll really see about Freud and his daughter, Anna. But the projection is identified with by the daughter. And guess what? 6 months later, he says, see, I was right. She got pregnant. But that's because he was projecting his inner slut, or whatever word we want to use, that he couldn't integrate. And he was projecting on her, and she unconsciously identified with it and acted it out. Now, what we've learned about psychotherapy is that happens also. But here's the thing: you always, in projective identification, which Siegel will talk about, and some of the contemporary psychoanalytic people, but what they're talking about in projective identification is that it's like an intersubjective field that the person identifies and acts it out. So, you always need to understand the power dynamics, because when a less powerful person projects onto a more powerful person, and the more powerful person identifies, that's what we call empathy. That's why, like in therapy, theoretically, like in therapy, I'm the more powerful person, especially if I'm dealing with an adolescent, but with anybody. The therapist is the more powerful person. So if a client project, like, what would be an example would be, client starts to feel like they're out of control, and they're getting into, like, they're getting close to that therapeutic window. So they're starting to experience emotions that they don't like or whatever. And they project on the therapist, like, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. I don't know. And all of a sudden, you, who don't usually feel that way as a therapist, start to feel, oh, shoot, I don't know what to do. And then that's an identification. So then the answer would be to metabolize it and say to the client, wow, I'm really feeling like I'm kind of lost here. I don't know what to do. I'm wondering if I'm picking up that from you. Now, this is where we get to the difference between introjective identification and projective identification. If I'm the therapist and I'm really picking up on the unconscious image of a child or a kid, or I'm picking up on that, and I might say something like, wow, I'm starting to feel a little bit worried. I wonder if I'm picking up on you. Or I might say, as you talk about your relationship with your friends, I'm just getting this picture of a little child off in the corner, all by itself, nobody there. She feels lost. And if it's really projective identification, then the client will burst into tears. They'll say, or they'll have expressed, they'll non-verbally tell you, yes, you're right. But sometimes they say, Dr. Lippincott, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. If they say that, then I have to look inside and understand, is this my introjective? Like my mom told me, oh, you're going to be a failure, and I introjected that, and the client is stimulating my own introject. You see, that's introjective. It's triggering and it's really a very simple way of saying you need, as a therapist, to tell your shit from the client's shit. But probably could phrase that better. But that's really it. That's introjective identification. Projective identification is when you're picking up from the client. But when a more powerful person, like a therapist or a parent, projects onto a least powerful person, that's really negative. That's what we call exploitation, or that's what we call a lot of negative things. And so you really need to understand the power dynamics. And it can be unconscious for the therapist too. Many, many years ago, when I first started supervising in the 80s, people didn't have the ability to, or didn't have the support to come out. Okay. And so there was and people would hide it more and repress it. It's still hard, but at that time it was even worse. And so I had a supervisee, a male, who kept coming to me and saying, I'm working with all these kids and I think they're having trouble with their gender, their sexuality. I think they might be gay, and through a lot of work, he realized he was, but lo and behold, through projective identification in the wrong way, several of the kids start saying that, oh, I'm gay. Now, they at least 10% of them probably were, but there was too much of that where his projection and the question, he was unconsciously leaking his own. So I challenged him on that, and through working on it, the solution was he started to accept himself, and then when he saw a kid that was gay or had alternative gender ideas and things like that were coming up, he was able to deal with that. But it took his own understanding of his own introjective identification. So projective identification, as it says here, has manyfold aims and may be directed towards the ideal object to avoid separation, or may be directed towards the bad object to gain control over some danger. So do you, like a kid is throwing blocks at a toy that I have, or a little stuffed animal, like a little cute stuffed animal. So I might make two interpretations within the play. I might say, ow, I'm a bear. I'm feeling scared, but the block's coming at me. Why are you doing that? Okay. Or I might say, oh, you must be really angry. Now, I'm going to kind of listen to which one of those interpretations the kid responds to, because that tells me where they're coming from. And many times, kids that are feeling threatened at home will identify with the aggressor, and maybe bully other kids and things like that. Various parts of the self might be projected with various aims. Bad parts of the self might be projected in order to get rid of them, as well as to attack and destroy the object. Good parts might be projected to avoid separation or to keep them safe from bad things inside, or improve the external object through a kind of primitive projective reparation, which is fixing. You project a negative and then you try to fix them. I mean, I've had so many little, like 3 and 4-year-olds. I get scared when mama cuts. I don't like it. As a parent is cutting in front of the kid. Which is obviously a lack of boundaries, but it's a thing that happens. Let me skip ahead here. Therapists and patient or clients constantly struggle to make meaning and sense out of what takes place in the therapeutic relationship. However, both parties are constantly tempted to act out these meanings rather than verbalize or mentalize them. An example is the client falls in love with the therapist, or the therapist starts to sexualize feelings towards the client, or whatever, which those things happen. There's mutual resistance to feeling and working with strong fantasy material in the room. But if you really want to deal with the psychodynamics, you got to deal with the family, the relationship, and with the internal conflicts of the person. You can't avoid them. Therapists are inevitably touched and contaminated and seduced by these dynamics. The effect of projective identification are strong and can produce intense countertransference reactions. Like Kohut, who is later psychodynamic, Heinz Kohut, would talk about the mirror transference, where immersed, and then the idealized transference. And that'd be like a client who came to me. This is a true story of another client. Came to me and said, I heard you're into dream work. Are you into dream work? And I said, yeah, I am. And so he proceeded for 1 year to come, and I could hardly get a word in edgewise, for a year to come and tell me his dreams. And about like 9 months in, he said, remember 6 months ago, that dream I had a whale? What did you, like, he finally let me in, but he expected me to remember every dream and everything. And he was projecting, and so that's the mirror transference. Then all of a sudden, oh, you know everything, doctor. And I would, somehow I slipped that I had saw a movie. And, I went and saw that movie 5 times. That's the idealized transference. And if you do really, really good therapy, at the end of it, it becomes what Kohut called a twinship transference, where you and the client are like equals, like twins. Now, intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity refers to the most basic sense to the basic interactions between two subjects, myself and another person, or self and other, I, thou. The study of consciousness, which we've been going over in this kind within Western science and philosophy, has been polarized between either or investigations. Either investigations of the third person, like it, when we want to make the client into a thing, objective correlates of experience and phenomena, okay? Or the thou, which has been mostly overlooked in Western philosophy, except notably in the intersubjectivity. Most notably, Jewish philosopher Martin Buber recognized that human beings have two responses available to the world: to relate to what is present as an object, it relationship, or as a responsible being, I-thou relationship. The essence between the human being was relationships, and Buber gave ontological status to the between, which is the intersubjective field. A mysterious force, creative milieu, are present from which to experience the self, and that arises from that. The spirit is not in the I, but between you and I. And if you look, when we talk about Jung talked about the soul and the spirit. And we both have both. The soul is the anima, the Latin term for anima. The spirit is the animus. And we used to think that women had animus and men have anima. Now we realize in Jungian psychology that all people have both. But if you think about it, the soul is something we individually have. Like if you read in the Bible or other books about the spirit, that'll say the spirit moved amongst the people, or the spirit of the team was up, and that's why they won the game. Where soul is more of an individual thing. That's what they're talking about. Both of those and the effect between people. And the key thing to this is if projective identification is not looked at by the therapist through the lens of the power dynamic, that becomes objectification and is actually evil to treat a person as an object, especially if you have more power. Now, when the child or the client projects onto the therapist and the therapist identifies, that's what we call empathy. That's empathic attunement. So that's what we want. But you always have to be aware of the power relationships between the two. Let's see. There's one more part. This is just a lot. Oh, but I think I tried to email it all to you. I don't know if it was too big to get, but hopefully you got it so you can look at them. Okay. Emergent structure formation within a dynamic system, which is the psychodynamics, the structures that are emerging as you talk to somebody over a period of time as a therapist and absorb who they are as a person, develops from intercoordination or cooperative interaction of the elements or subsystems as they coalesce into a self-organized pattern. So this picture is like, what is this? That's an example of like you look at that, you can see a lot of little things. This part right here looks like a tongue, and some of you might look at the hole. And so this looks a little bit like a shark to me. Okay, things like that. Okay. From this perspective, for example, interactive repetitive transferences and resistances seen clinically can be grasped as a rigid, stable state of the patient analyst system, in which the analyst stance has become tightly coordinated with the patient's grim expectations and fears of re-traumatization. That is especially true if there's trauma and you push, or we therapists, push too hard for the client to re-experience it. Examples in our clinical work of clinical phenomena viewed from a systems perspective include a vision of psychopathological states, of multiple dimensions of transference, and of the very boundary between conscious and unconscious, all as fluidly shifting properties of ongoing dynamic, didactic, intersubjective systems. And a lot of this also is related to the child and the primary caregiver, all those things. The intersubjective perspective, however, is not a clinical theory in the sense of a set of prescriptions or rules of technique. Indeed, we criticize the very concept of technique in psychoanalysis as relying on the assumption that one isolated mind, the analyst, is supposed, scroll down, right here, is supposed to do something to another isolated mind, the patient. Technique belongs to the realm of things of generality, mechanization, routinization, not to mention compliance and accommodation. And accommodation, we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about Piaget. The intersubjective field, on the contrary, is the realm of practice. So it's practical. It's like what we do in there. The idea of understanding the uniquely patterned interplay of particular subjectivity. So, for instance, just very simple idea. For instance, like you get a vignette in a job interview, and it talks about cultural. What are the cultural issues? You're never going to say, "Oh, there are no cultural issues," because cultural issues are like I'm a man, that Klein is a female, or I might, are those always going to be these subjective differences there that we want to look at, and like, what does it feel like to be talking about your trauma from your dad to a white man, with a beard just like your dad? All those things are part of the subjectivities, and it's very complex and it's not simple. And we try to break it down in theory, but that really doesn't work. A contextualist view, which I emphasize, leads inevitably to a reflexive attitude and remains perpetually open to new dimensions of actions and experiences. Fatalism characterizes both the thought and practice of a contextualist. That means that we recognize that our present understanding of anything or anyone is only a perspective within a horizon, inevitably limited by the historicity of our own organized and organizing experience. That's why, I'm not going to sail off into the Pacific Ocean because I might fall off the edge of the earth. If that's our context, that's what we're going to create. Okay. So I'm going to stop my...
A Jungian point of view. And again, I go over in a deeper level in my book, Analytical Psychology and Family Systems. So, did I freeze? Thank you very much. And I will appreciate your comments and your thumbs up if you feel that way. Thank you.